Hi everyone. I already wrote a small message in the group chat to welcome you. I guess we can say we kind of agree that we will be 5 minutes late, but not academic 15 as usually is. But I guess people will join us a bit later anyway. Welcome to our discussion, home office, the work balance. I like this title very much because it refers to one of the works from the guest speakers that will be presenting today. This event is supported by the public funding of the Slovak Arts Council. It is important to mention, and also organized and actually hosted by Robota Center for Advanced Studies. This is an organization that analyzes how technological changes influence individuals and societies by challenging the substance of being human. They do it by analyzing different aspects like or using different methods of analysis such are algorithmic governance, automatization, AI, and especially interesting for them is the concept of nature today, questions of work, creativity, and leisure, something that we will also discuss today. They have a running exhibition called Human Sovereignty at the moment. Also, they have been very active during the lockdown and generally in 2020. They organized the conference, Rapture, Ouroboros Festival. Last year, a lecture series titled Artificial Entanglement, and in 2018, Technopolitics Salon. Um, yes, so today or this evening, we will have three guest speakers, and they will be presenting their ideas and works each 15 minutes. It will be possible to ask very short questions to each speaker after the very presentation, or if you would like, you can also write the question that we can discuss later on in the general discussion. After the presentations and small questions, we will have a small break of 5 minutes, and then we will start discussing. Our guest speakers this evening are Silvio Lorusso, Sharka Homfrey, and Martina Šimkovićova. In order of appearance, in the order of guest speakers, I would like to say or announce Silvio. He is affiliated researcher at the Institute of Network Amsterdam, creative coding tutor at the Royal Academy of Art in Den Haag, and also tutor at the design department of the Sandberg Institute. He is a multifaceted artist, combining different media, also publishing, curating, and organization of public events. In his works, as we will see, there is a clear and concentrated interest in the effects of the technology on humans. In 2018, he published his book, Enter Precariat, and his presentation will be based on the book. The second speaker we have this evening is Martina Šimkovićova. She is a photographer and a visual artist dealing with the issues of work, productivity, and media reflected practices. She held a seminar, Golden Age of Still Life, Instagram Strategies at the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava. And she is a founder of Robota Center for Advanced Studies. I am very thankful that she invited me to moderate this event. In the context of her work, it's very interesting to mention the work titled Work-Life Balance that somehow reflects in the title as well of this discussion, and the diagrams of productivity and laborware. Martina will have her presentation titled The Paradise of Home Office. And also, Sharka Homfrey is a lawyer specialized in labor law, public service law, and equality law. She's also a trade unionist and a feminist. In 2020, she studied the effects of pandemic on gender equality, especially concerning Czech job market. She has been also analyzing precarious working conditions, gender pay gap, and also different effects of remote work. She will present her research, home office in times of coronavirus. And just to say something about the very topic that we are going to discuss today. Um, yeah, so home office is a kind of a symbol of precarity. It was an already familiar term from before. It was practiced a long time by like academics, freelancers, especially high-level executives. But like during the pandemic, it kind of expanded to also different jobs that usually were not taken up with this phenomena. Uh, Home office represents some kind of a merging between public and private, between work and leisure. And it started transforming all of our actions and translating them in the words of productivity. So the labor has been expanded in time and space. And the questions that I would like to pose this evening that we will discuss a bit later are definitely concerning the who can afford being in home office and who benefits from it. How do we measure productivity in times of home office? How did technology influence our work? Because it definitely did not make it easier. One more thing which I find really interesting with all of the presenters is that the question of the need of regulation is appealing all the time, and this is one of the things that we should discuss. And parallel to the issue of home office as a kind of symbol for precarity is definitely going along um, with artist work and feminized labor. So I will welcome our first speaker tonight, Silvio. Please unmute yourself. I will mute myself. If you have some questions, very short ones, please write them and we will post them after his presentation.
Hello. Give me just a second to try to share the screen. In the meantime, of course, what I want to say is that I'm very thankful to be here and yeah, glad to be able to try to reflect together on these notions of home office and productivity in times of pandemic. I need yeah. Yeah, you should be able now to see my screen. If you can confirm it, that would be great. So yeah, you can. Okay, nice. Another little request, if you don't mind, is just to tell me when I have like 5 minutes left, so I cannot, I avoid taking too much time. Okay, I would like to start this presentation by contextualizing a bit my work through the book I published in 2019 in English, which is called Antreprecariat. I'm gonna quickly go straight to a point that connects, I think, to let's say to the notions that that are connected to today's debate. So what I looked in the book is how much the entrepreneurship as an ideology developed through time. And I'm gonna give like a quick fast forward to that, just to contextualize a bit. So we have at the beginning of the century, an Austrian economist, which is Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, who was already speaking of entrepreneurs in a very heroic sense, as you can read in this quote. So this idea of facing risks without having fear, the ability to deal with change. But what Schumpeter was saying at the time was that entrepreneurship was not for the masses, was for a very small elite, smaller even than that of inventors and the so-called innovators. If we do a fast forward a few years before, we have Peter Drucker, who is a guru of management, who reversed this postulate by saying that the full economy should become an economy of entrepreneurs and innovators. So there is this pyramid that is like reverted. And what are the features of entrepreneurs, of like mass entrepreneurship? So a habit of flexibility, of the so-called lifelong learning, and acceptance of change as normal. So both for institutions and individuals. And finally, more recently, we had people like Reid Hoffman, who is co-founder of LinkedIn, sort of naturalizing this condition of the entrepreneur and saying, okay, every human being is an entrepreneur. But of course, there is like a darker side of this narrative, which has to do with the fact that there is a personal responsibilization. So if everyone is an entrepreneur, they have their own responsibility to stay afloat, basically. This is hence the slogan I have in the cover of the book. So of course, you cannot go against entrepreneurship because it's a factual practice in current society. So this is a very basic definition of entrepreneurship. So this activity of setting up a business, taking on financial risks in hope of profit. And this is somehow truly generalized in the sense that also writing a book can be seen at least as a form of financial risk in a sense, or like time risk. And there is a hope for profit because you hope that you will sell or you will gain symbolic capital with it. What is different, and that is the shift that I'm trying to describe, is the system of value that is built upon this practice. And a lot of it has to do with notions of freedom and autonomy. So the idea of being your own boss, and you can consider how much, to what extent this idea of autonomy is freedom, and freedom is a negative idea of freedom. So being free from disturbances, from nuisance, from like from your own goal. So starting to see other people as obstacles, basically. And I think this image, this meme, well allegorizes this idea of freedom. So yeah, you are free to somehow, command yourself somehow. Another nice way to put it. This is from humorous Instagram account to say, okay, I stopped working from the man, and now I have like way more smaller bosses, which is the reality of many freelancers, right? And I started to call this, after the publishing of the book, photonomy, so fake autonomy, borrowing from another notion, which is photomation, fake automation. So the idea that it's autonomy but on paper, right? And in the book, I touch upon two dimensions of life, which is like time and space. And here I would like to try to show you how, let's say, this idea of autonomy understood as control somehow plays a role here, especially in productivity, in modes of managing productivity. In the book, I look at many browser application, plugins, etc., to manage productivity and to increase it. And you see that many of them are, to a certain extent, punitive and also very ingenious, like this one, which is called Productivity Owl, which goes to the tab of your browser, the procrastinating tab, and it closes after a certain time. Or there is like this app called the Isolator, which blurs, makes it dark, everything that is in another window, which is inspired by this original isolator. Again, we see like this idea of autonomy. Autonomy as isolating from others, freedom to do what you have to do in the most fragmenting way, automizing way. Of course, what's the biggest enemy of all these tools? The biggest enemy is procrastination, which can be categorized according to these three features. So counterproductivity, unnecessity, delay. But of course, those are relative categories and qualities of procrastination. So you can start thinking of all your life as counterproductive, unnecessary, and delay based. Is it a walk at the park, a form of procrastination? Is sleep a form of procrastination? And this was already somehow intuited and already understood long ago. For example, Adorno was already speaking of free time as a shadowy continuation of labor. But there is another point that now becomes very clear and is very much foregrounded with our current situation, which is a point made by Melissa Gregg. She wrote a wonderful book called Counterproductive. And the point is that productivity is not just a functional tool, but it's also an aesthetic form. It's something that helps us to give an impression of self-control. And it's also an illusion because we know that time can't really be managed. We discover this with our schedules, no, which are messy and confused. Here is the book. Another point, which is we can add to Melissa Gregg, which is very clear in this project by Cox and Grusenmeyer, is the fact that productivity and being busy is also, it's not only a way to comfort ourselves that we are being productive, so an aesthetic form towards ourselves, but also towards others. So we also qualify ourselves and legitimate ourselves based on showing how busy we are. But what's the other side then of like this sort of timing control, this entrepreneurial time, is what Ito Steyer, which is an artist and an essayist, called junk time. So time that is broken down, kaput, wrecked, discontinuous, distracted, and running on several parallel tracks. I think it's a perfect definition to describe the kind of temporality we live in. One application was particularly fascinating to me, one of these plugins for productivity, and it's called Stay Focused. So basically, Stay Focused, works like many others. After like 30 minutes of what you call it, Facebook, it will shut it down. It has a lot of users. The guy who made it hasn't had any free time since 1994. That's what he says. It has some punitive ways to change the settings. And finally, this is what you get when your time is over on procrastination. I thought that visually, again, speaking of this ecstatic form of productivity, it was perfect. It was like very blunt and monumental, this way to put it. It was a big surprise when I saw it first, almost a little shock, let's say. And it reminded me of this graffiti by Guy Debord, which I think was in the 50s. Oh, I don't remember exactly. I'm sorry. But anyway, so he wrote this graffiti in Rue de Seine in Paris, which says, "Never work, ne travaillez jamais." And funnily enough, someone turned this. This graffiti into a postcard, adding this idea, this label saying like, okay, useless suggestion, useless advice. Guy Debord got super pissed about this and said, no, it can't really be seen as superfluous advice, given that that work is imposed on most people nowadays. So I thought, okay. Can we externalize this question that we don't need an app to tell us that we should be working? No, it's just like an internalized kind of pressure. So I had in mind this sort of Carpenter-like dystopia, and I started small. by making like little stickers that I would sell at fairs or like give to friends. And people started to put it in nice places, which are generally related to leisure. Fridge, yeah. Some people also connected to other slogans that relate very closely to this. Or some others started to hack the slogan and to have it, less normative, so to speak. Well, more normative even, because it's not even a question. And then I started to make it bigger and bigger because people started to ask me to show it in exhibitions. So I made a banner out of it, some sort of your crime scene of leisure kind of tape, which would work like this. People had to confront this question while entering. And finally, this is the biggest iteration of this work, like this giant vinyl sticker in France. And what I want to say about this is also that it's ironic because it's truly like it's like the work that traveled the most of mine in like exhibition, so it's the most successful from that point of view. But it's also the one that really takes me less effort to contextualize. So it really saves me time in a way. I don't know how to put it. It's not a complex work. So in a way, I realized the critique by by not having to think too much in order to install it in a new show. A bit like conceptual art in the 60s and 70s. But then, how does this fake idea of control about time relates then to space? And what I did in the book was looking at this category of the digital nomad. The digital nomad can be described in many ways, but it's somehow like a worker that travels. It's a bit obscene, this definition of digital nomad, no? Because we know that we have nomadism nowadays that is forced. So it's really strange to use this term, but it's the term that was popularized, and now we deal with it. Um, and Nicola Bozzi started to write about it. And the feature that he sort of highlighted was the fact that the digital nomad, wherever he or she is, they are anyways wired. And that's the feature of the main feature that I also started to realize about the digital nomad. So the digital nomad was like pushed by many services online, and we can find somehow its origin in this provocative project by an Austrian architect. I realize I have a lot of Austrian references. It's not on purpose. Anyway, it's called Ansoline, and he created this mobile bureau. And which, to watch it, to see it nowadays, is to me is very striking, because you see the picture. Is an architect inside of the bubble. He has like a telephone, so he can speak with clients, a board to to draw. And this was supposed, it was a, you see, it's filmed, it was filmed for TV. It was supposed to show dynamism and freedom. So the guy arrives to this airport via plane, via two people plane. So this idea of roaming the world. But what we see nowadays, with the pandemics in mind, is some sort of depressing self-isolation, a sort of like a sort of cage, no, a transparent cage. So already this project back in the 60s, the late 60s, was already somehow bringing again for grounding, like the tensions between a real autonomy and a fake one. Also, we see that the guy is wired and is attached to, let's say, a pump to bring the air, and of course to the wire of the phone, of the telephone. Um,
Silvio,
well,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Maybe you could use a few more minutes
yeah.
for a short conclusion.
Okay. How much minutes do I have? Like a couple?
You have 0 minutes, but I
Ah,
think we
okay.
can put some additional
Okay,
ones.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's
This
yeah.
is fine.
That's okay. Then I'm gonna directly jump to somehow to the conclusion. I'm sorry, I miscalculated totally. Well, well, let's yeah. Okay, let me put it like this. I was looking at the digital nomads, but of course, the other side of this is like the people who stay at home. And what is the feature, let's say, the qualities and categories that come to the fore when we have to deal with work at home? I think two aspects are foregrounded. One is the ability and necessity to delegate work. That's why we see a lot of companies and systems in which we ask other people to do work for us. For example, having grocery being brought to your place. And so we see a polarization in society that, as you can call it, between like the people who outsource and the people who are outsourced to a way. And the pandemic is bringing this to the fore. And of course, delegating work also means having to supervise it. So also a degree of surveillance becomes somehow inherent to the system of delegation. If you allow me, like really a quick reflection on the home, on the condition of the home. I've been very fond of this book, which unfortunately is not translated to English. It's called "Be Without a Home." And it's about how much the home is not anymore a welcoming place, doesn't feel a welcoming place. And I would like to give very briefly like a quick reasoning of why this is the case. So first of all, is because the home is really not, it doesn't feel like a home anymore. It acts like a dormitory, an office, a warehouse. It doesn't create meaning, especially when it's temporary. It's a meaningless concoction of furniture. At least it feels like this for many people. So first of all, it's not like just just a spatial. It's not just a space, but it's also a temporal configuration. And this is, I think, what we have to keep in mind. Of course, and this is a bit obvious, it's structured around the semi-public activity of work. See the trend of workstations. It doesn't protect anymore from neither from productive labor nor reproductive labor. We have seen it with the BBC clip. But this is not something new. It's becoming new. It's becoming visible, but it's always been the case, especially for women. And the big point is this: that this temporal dimension, the temporality and the temporariness, let's say, of the house prevails on the special dimension. So a contract ending, changing of job, all symbolized in the IKEA furniture. Also, it reflects an implosion of, let's say, traditional social arrangement of the family. And in many ways, the house is not protecting, it's not an inside anymore. It's not like different from the outside in any way. So it's more like a vehicle that doesn't move. So I would conclude by saying it doesn't offer this continuity from the discontinuity of the world. The world out there is discontinuous and messy, and the home itself becomes somehow the same discontinuity, so the same mess. And we need discontinuity from discontinuity in order to create a meaning for ourselves. And this meaning is necessary to create a sense of self. And unfortunately, the home doesn't seem to offer the protection to do this. Thank you. I'm sorry if I took too much time.
Thank you. Do you have some small short questions? Or we can proceed to the next guest speaker and leave the questions for later. I would like to mention something while Martina is preparing her presentation. This work, shouldn't you be working, that you said it's so simple and you don't need so much time to kind of um, Okay, there is a question by Martina. I would just like have a short comment beforehand. This moment of this easy work without so much effort that somehow gets it to all the exhibition rooms. Shouldn't you be working? Um, it somehow, if we look it together with your other work, fake it till you make it. There is like this huge moment of, or like there is a moment of hypocrisy that appears there that you always in your artistic work try to put up to like try to make it visible, like shouldn't you be working, like this is a kind of a surveillance system where you know the machines and technology should actually keep us out from work, not being like surveilling us and developing different kind of types of applications to control our productivity. On the other hand, this work, fake it till you make it. There is like this presentation of these two CEOs with like these motivation sentences and slogans, but in reality, actually, they committed a suicide. So, like, you're kind of always showing this fakeness of this presented like entrepreneurship like but like in the public. So how do you understand it? So like what is your viewpoint, what is your side to it?
Okay, well, maybe I can answer by saying this. I mean, you mentioned a work of mine, which is, yeah, compared to the lightness somehow of the shouldn't you be working, which is clearly, um, it's a serious work, but it's also humorous in a way. The other work that you mentioned, this fake it till you make it, is like, it's not humorous at all. Um, and these entrepreneurs that committed suicide very publicly, it was very publicly covered because they were like known in the scene. Um, it's not about the inauthenticity of their claims. It's the belief in a plane of reality that a certain moment crumbles completely. So that's the issue I see with this illusion of control. That suddenly, like the burden of reality becomes like so obvious, and people burn out, people commit suicide, people just quit. There is like more healthy and less healthy solution. So um, there is no hypocrisy. There is more of let's say of like different planes of reality that interact and explode at a certain time. And I think that in a little way everybody experienced this. Like, yeah, that's why, yeah, I guess this is the way I
You
would.
like to see it in a very neutral way, more analytical than to take sides. This is how I understood it. Because from the way you say, like you always tend not to like present it as like extreme, as I kind of presented it like hypocrisy. You're like more, it's different slices of reality. So like I would say because of your answer that your position is tending to be very neutral. There is one small question from Martina to you. Do you think the notion of home will continue to change the direction which you described in your presentation, or do you see also other options in future?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that the direction that I described, this idea of the home and the house, the house not feeling like a home anymore, is like it will increase. Uh, you see it already, like people living in London, in I don't know, in other urban centers, like running away and saying like it's meaningless to live here. I was living here just to be close to work. Um, so maybe there will be like a chance to recreate meaning far from, let's say, the capitals of capital somehow. You know, to create like a distance from that organization of life, from the social factory of the capitals of work. some people in a privileged state are able to somehow do this or to try to do this. In Italy, the word that the word that was coined to express this was south working. I come from the south of Italy, so people starting to say, why do I have to live in Milan when I can live in Naples or in Sicily and have a more convivial life? Um, I don't know like how much this model will take place and how good it is, but of course the question is starting to like also the city is becoming alien. That's it's losing its meaning again. To use the terminology I used before, it's becoming meaningless to live in Amsterdam, for example.
Yeah, like the home becomes nomadic. There is
Yeah.
like just nomadic office without a home. Okay, so maybe we can invite Martina for her presentation now, and we will continue our discussion a bit later. If you have some questions for Martina during her presentation, please write them in the chat.
Hello, everybody. Uh, Thank you, Silvio, for many interesting points, which I feel some points of my presentation will be also in a way related to the question of home, or rather the home as a social space. I was also wondering about, and we also were speaking with Jelena about the fact that the city would be a very interesting place for situation is in the lockdown situation, because people going significantly less to work are basically less moving, and there would be a very good question: what is the revolution of moving? What is the psychogeography of an empty city? Of course, now I am a bit exaggerating the situation, but still, uh, how do we perceive space? How do we walk? How do we move? Is changing very much. And my presentation um, will be dealing with the question of home office as a paradise or as a questionable paradise. Before the coronavirus pandemic, many employers were giving the home office to employees as something of a benefit of having the comfort of your home, a benefit of not having to commute, and the ability thus to use the time instead of commuting for your own well-being or for your hobby. But the lockdown home office situation, especially during the first wave of coronavirus pandemic, turned to be a very different situation from a benefit. I would speak about it in this presentation to be a situation of anachrony. We have a pre-industrial revolution family setup. Speaking of a nuclear family, everybody at home together, in some cases 24/7, without the benefits of schools, without the benefits of institutionalized child care, without the benefits of extended family, since the extended family is perceived to be a risk group, or without the benefits of underpaid children caretakers. And at the same time, uh, the many families or households is maybe a better word, um, have experienced the post-industrial working setup. We are speaking about work which is to be done via computer. It's an immaterial, abstract, intangible workload to be done with help of machines, with acoustic and visual sensations, consisting of tasks and conversations. And of course, the social interaction and the teamwork has been also reduced to visual and audio sensation. Uh, so the social happening has turned more to an observation or rather voyeuristic activity on social networks, to which the providers of the social network services responded very quickly. The pandemic home office setup reveals the alienation of work from life in three ways. In terms of content, in terms of time organization, and in terms of engagement of other household members. The last illusion of division between work and private life, connected to respective places of happening, they collapsed. Even before we had the chance to switch off the phone with email notifications and tasks from the work, but now the digital imagos of our bosses, managers, and colleagues merged directly into the households. When we speak about the home office as a benefit, we also need to mention that it was, in a way, of course, a measurement to provide some safety for people to reduce social interaction and therefore the spreading of a virus. So we should not forget this when speaking about the negative effects, but still, it was a benefit for a smaller bit of population who is. When we speak of Slovakia, it was accessible only to something like 36% of population, mostly university educated, freelancing with high level of knowledge work in larger cities. So while being something to save people, it's still a privilege for the few. It's given the character also of the lot of production mode. So the option of home office changed from the polished working benefit to an obligation. And many people started to share the negative experiences of it on social platforms. And especially people with caring responsibilities could experience the fall of the carefully balanced system, which actually rendered institutional education more as a repository of children than something which is connected to the everyday life. And it was exactly the question of productivity connected to the feeling of happiness, which then was a key for this selection of images from the social media. What do we see here is an image which up to this date still hasn't been found the author of, but it's not a real Fisher Price game set, it's rather a mock-up which is commenting on the situation. We see here a very busy child and a mock-up of a crying baby, 2 empty bottles of wine, chips, everything we need to show to the other generations that is important. This is how the productivity looks like. This is how important work looks like. At the same time, it's a very important commentary on what we see to be important. The people living alone or without caring responsibilities were more reporting to be enjoying the home office under quarantine, as there was more time for their hobbies and more time to optimize their productivity. Although they were also reporting that they were working more than in the office, especially in the countries with developed employee tracking, such as the US or Australia. We can also see there are already studies being done on the fact that women in academia have started to be publishing less papers during the pandemic due to the child care responsibilities, which could not be overtook. And there were also there came also a huge question: what is then the productivity? Is the question of showing not being able to make it an honest and important cry, which is speaking of the fact the system is not working, or is it just an information that that person is just not genius enough? This meme, which was cruising through the Twitter for quite a long time, has become then a subject to a strong debate on normies and not being able to bring the genius performances to the rest of the population or to the rest of the corporate life. Of course, many institutions in the private and public sectors are technically better prepared for the home office situation now than they were in March. Also, the schools are mostly left open, and also, or they are learning how to deal better with the spreading. Important is to say that the potential for virus spreading is remaining an untouched topic due to several reasons. There are not enough data, or there are coming up studies which show very diverse outcomes. Some studies say that schools pose a low risk for the rest of population. There are some studies which show that the schools are actually quite a risky place for the population because children can't be obeying the social distance rules so closely than the adults. Here we can see an example of a longer conversation from a woman asking other people in families how do they deal with the situation, and also admitting the fact that even if splitting up the workload evenly between the partners is done very thoroughly, they are still at just 50% of their productivity. So they can't 50% of their time, and they can't manage the 100% workload as they were used to. This is an example from a lengthy conversation about homeschooling, which many parents fell into during the pandemic, and it remains a big question. Not only how far are the youngest generations for a distance from the work life of their parents, but also how far are the parents distance from what the children are being taught at school. In other words, we see that the specification of the activities has gone such a huge way that it's difficult to meet together on the very simple things of what are you learning, or what are you doing, or how can I join there. Of course, the fact of being able to work without having to go somewhere has been something that many people could enjoy, but at the same time then also mocking up others for not working enough, for not being productive enough. At the same time, it then brings a question: what is the good role model, or how was the new role model of productive worker in the coronavirus pandemic being presented, and how people did identify or not identify with that fact. The last visuals I'm going to show are actually real Fisher Price toy set, showing the work from home options. It remains an open question what the situation, which was coined as the new normal, what the situation will embed into our societies and into the minds of future generations, as of what does it mean to be a good worker? What does it mean to be a productive person? What is productivity really connected to happiness? And what I also consider to be a topic not reflected enough is how much technology is possible to replace the social life in all generations of our society. Thank you. That was my presentation. And
Thank
now,
you, Martina, for the presentation. I have a direct comment. Um, During your presentation, you kind of said that like home is a kind of a safety, while Silvio was talking about home, like or home office is kind of isolation. So it's interesting the way that like how isolation, the idea about isolation is like turned into like safety. So isolation is self like as a safety measure, but also like okay, then we can discuss further this isolation, like this kind of invisible dividing walls and everything. But like in your terms, Martina, like you, I think that your position comes from the fact that you're a mother, and also, I would also say that you have some feminist tendencies. And I keep wondering, like, what did you learn, and is there some tip that you learned from all this home office, like ideas from other parents? How do they deal with it? Because you were reading many of these posts on social platforms.
um,
Is there a recipe, like home office recipe during the pandemic for parents?
I learned that there is no one recipe for it. Uh, there are as many recipes as there are people, but definitely one thing which I consider to be important is that uh, we are not alone and we don't have to be alone. So we need to find other ways of networking, other ways of helping, other ways of sharing workload. And despite the fact that many things can be delegated online, which is the thing, it analog help is still at least of the same importance as is the digital one, because and this is a very tricky question, and I don't like to generalize so much in this way,
Uh,
but
so you basically think it's like so digital labor is as important as the like manual labor, and the fact that, for example, some women who earn like much better are able to afford someone else to take care of their children while they're working. Normally, some other woman who is like of lesser, let's say, financial possibilities, usually of color and migrant and so on and so on. How do you see this? Like, so you, I would say that you seem that to kind of say both works are important, but how do you see this moment of academics being actually able to pay for someone to look after their children? Actually, your so not your, but like their our like women colleagues, let's say like this.
hmm,
This is even trickier one.
this is even trickier one, exactly.
Yes.
I think we have to have quite a strong notion of what is fair and not to undergo that, uh, because there is the human level of it, and there is also the practical level of it. So if it doesn't have, it has to work for you, but but it also should work for the other person involved. Yeah, and then you question yourself, of course, what do you like more to do? Yeah, if you like to be more doing the work at the house and or being with your child, or if someone else should be doing that and you are very much into the work you're doing. And these are questions which are not directly monetizable,
Mm,
which are more the question of, are you, what is content, what's your mental health there. And I think also the question of safety at home, I of course use the general parole of safety connected to the coronavirus, yeah, which is also about reducing the social context. There has never been a direct, it has never been forbidden, even in the coronavirus times, to meet people at home, to let them work at home, but still, through the pressure both by the governmental information, non-governmental information, people tended to do this less, you know, and you have to also question this. That's
The
why.
European Parliament doesn't work, so I mean,
Right?
European Parliament doesn't have their meetings, so I mean,
Yeah, for instance.
yeah, I just wanted to introduce um, like or to start bringing our discussion more towards Sharka's presentation now,
Sure.
because I think she has a very clear viewpoints based on the data and the research she made. Thank you, Martina, for your presentation. We will go to Sharka now and then see the questions and the break and then a general discussion.
Okay, thank you for the word. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay? Great. I will set up a timer for my presentation, so I attempt to be within the time limit. Let me just share the screen and then we'll get on with it. Mhm. Um, just a second. I'm sorry, it somehow disappeared. Just a second.
It is possible to share different windows. I think you have to choose the window of your
Yes,
presentation as a
I know, and the way I tested it worked,
Mm-hmm.
worked okay when I tested it, but it's now. Mm-hmm. Can you see the presentation? Yes, can we see the presentation?
Yes, we see.
Okay, great. Um, right. Um, as I have been introduced, I'm a lawyer. I specialize in labor law and employers employees relationships. I work in Czech Republic, so obviously my main domain is the Czech law. However, Czech law is based on the European Labor Law Foundation. So with many differences, there are also many similarities. I don't think it's absolutely crucial for my presentation, the fact that my suggestions and my knowledge is based on the Czech labor code, because the principles of home office and the principles of regulation that it seems to require in the turbulent times of pandemic should be more or less universal. In my presentation, I will refer back to what I found when I was studying the effects of pandemic and flexible working arrangements and home office, etc., on the Czech job market and on the gender equality on the job market. And I would like to try summarize some lessons for the future, something we should take away from that. Before I start the presentation itself, I would like to point out that what I found out and what I also personally experienced was very, very similar to what Martina just presented. And it also underscores the fact that what we're experiencing is sort of more or less universal. Okay. The basic principles, and now I'm speaking about people who are employed. They're not freelancers, they're not self-employed, they're not, they have the sort of we could call the classic job or traditional job. Uh, and the biggest change in the times of pandemic was that their office, mostly it was office, moved basically from the office to their home. And while that was the only change, it was a significant change because it sort of shifts how we put a perception of the working arrangements, and also it slightly affects or it affects the perception that our bosses have about our job and about our work relationship. But we should remember, both sides should remember that work from home is still work. You're not on holiday, but you are not just freelancing and contributing. all the work regulations more or less apply. That could be a good thing, and that could be a bad thing. Or to give it describe it in less loaded terms, it could be useful and flexible, and it could be also not quite so useful and flexible. But the truth is, when you're working from home, you're still working, which means all the regulations and principles apply. You should have some sort of set working hours. You have a system in which your boss gives you the tasks to perform, the way he check or she checks upon you, how you deliver the results, how the results are enumerated. You could also have holiday. You should be able to claim your own sickness leave. All this doesn't change just by the fact that you switched from your office to your home. One of the questions that have been asked is uh, quite is who's paying for my chair? I'm not supposed to work from home. My employer said that we are now all supposed to work from home, but I don't have an office. I don't have a home office. I don't even have a desk. All I have is a kitchen table. Now, in normal times, the legal rules are, or what the law expects is that if you agree with your employer that you're going to work from home, the employer is responsible for setting up the office for you. That usually means that you will buy a proper office chair and at least some sort of desk. They should contribute to that, or refund the cost. There should be some contribution towards whatever you're using, which is usually internet connection. It could be your phone tariffs. It could be some electricity. That's what the law expects. However, during the times of pandemic, we now realized that all of a sudden, many people, it was tens or hundreds or even thousands of working positions now moved to home and it was expected it was only going to be temporary. In fact, the data showed that it was quite temporary. Uh, the findings were that while in April, only 55% of employees in Czech Republic commuted to their work daily, the number went much higher in summer, and at the beginning of October, when the so-called second wave was already on the way, and employers were advised to keep people at home again, it was still 80% of people who were commuting to their work. Which means after the spring experience, many employers sort of didn't want to quite let that happen again. One of the reasons was the inability to provide for proper offices and paying all the costs and bear them, immediately and for temporary times. So that I have to say is something that is not expected from the legal point of view, and it doesn't have a sort of straight answer saying, but you have to do that, because if the position was very strong on compensating the cost of moving to home office, then probably very few employees would, or certainly much less than actually did, would work from home because the employers simply couldn't afford to make that happen. And the second question that I get asked very often is about the working hours. In my presentation, there was that complaint that even if you switch between child care and working, you can only sort of spend half of the usual time working, and that seems to be the absolute practical problem and legal problem as well. The labor law expects you to either work or not work. If you have, for example, childcare responsibilities and the school is closed, you either can work from home and then you have to somehow reconcile the both uh, things happening, or you could go on carer's leave and get some 60% of your salary and basically not be obliged to work. But there is not a real combination of flexible switching between these two arrangements, such as I would be working maybe 60%, 70% of my usual working time for the same salary, and I will compensate for it later. simply law doesn't sort of expect this situation. Um, if I stick with your working hours, those were the biggest lessons that we learned about so-called flexible working arrangements. Home office, as Martina also mentioned, used to be some sort of benefit. Many more people wanted to use it than were actually allowed to use it. And now, after the huge experience, not as many people seem to be such as keen of it as they may have thought. And part of that reason is actually the working hours. Um, as I said, according to the law, if you're working from home, the law expects you to design or schedule your working hours. Your boss usually or quite often thinks that they design them and that you should be available at all times because they're giving you a favor by letting you work from home, and in return you should be at all times available. And if you have small children at home because of the closed schools, they probably expect you to not work at all and just attend to them. And even if they don't expect you, you sometimes simply have to. So designing working hours, scheduling working hours in times of pandemic, especially with either childcare or some other care obligations, seem to be the biggest riddle. And again, law is not prepared for such a situation. What we need are basically two things, and I would refer to them as respect and resources. Remote work, even in calmer times than are the pandemic times we're experiencing now, requires more mutual respect and understanding on both sides of the contract. It's not really at all that easy to regulate mutual respect by law, but there are certainly some principles that law should, and sometimes even already is, regulate. And those are the things regarding, for example, specific scheduling specific working hours. What seemed to be the most practical problem is that neither of the sides of these working from home arrangements were kind of used to that and prepared for that. Managing a team that's sitting all over your local area is much more difficult, or maybe not necessarily difficult, but expects different managerial skills than if you have them all in one office. And I have to say, in practical life, not many teams and their managers were prepared to do that. Also, some of the employees had troubles actually focusing at home. Let it be due to the fact that there was much more distraction present, or let it be because of the care possibilities or any other reasons whatsoever. The second thing we need are resources. If I ask an employer, if you ask an employee, do you have what it takes to work from home? You may be asking him a slightly surprising question, but one of the things is that not all jobs are suitable for being done from home, and not all people are actually um, suitable for working from home. Well, some of the things I could mention are obviously, as I said, managing your own distractions, scheduling your own time, being your own, let's say, a person who checks up on yourself. But what could also be meant by that, and that's again one of the practical problems, is the fact that not many people actually have the structural and technical infrastructural things that they need to perform their work. Um, Unlike in Italy, probably, I suppose, where it's now more and more possible to not live in the big cities just because of the work. In Czech Republic, and again we have research data on that, most home officeable working positions were still concentrated in the big cities. And even if you are now going to work from your home, you may have problems specifically with internet connection. Czech Republic doesn't have at all that good internet infrastructures, and there are, for example, many areas where the connection is not good enough to hold a Zoom call. It might be okay for sending emails, but not for holding teleconferences. And that's something that obviously limits the possibilities a lot. um, the experience is bringing us to what I called new rights, reacting to new problems, or whatever we can take away from these times is that there are things that we didn't know we would need or that would bother us, and now we know somehow have to react them. One of them is something that's been discussed before the times of pandemic, and now it's even more urgent than ever before, and I already mentioned that briefly, and that's so-called right to disconnect. You don't have to be present at all times. You don't have to be available at all times. You don't have to check your emails at all times. And there are some, I think Germany is already thinking, or maybe even introduced into the legislation, uh, the expression of this right to disconnect, of not be available outside business hours, working hours. You should also have the right to not for work from home. Either not work from home at all if your home is simply not suitable for that, or to only work from home some of the time and not all of the time, and have the right to return to your office or spend your time in your office at some point. Um, this also has been sort of discussed before the pandemics, thinking that once um, the businesses or the employers find out uh, uh, how much advantage and how much benefit they get from their employees working from home, and how much savings they can, for example, have on that, they would really cut the physical working spots in the offices. That hasn't yet proved to be right, because, as I said, the willingness to actually offer work from home was not very high. But now, when everybody worked, there's still that risk, and um, simply the law could reflect on the fact that all work homes are not suitable for working. Work-life balance is a completely different set of issues now. Whatever we thought of it before, sort of drastically changed when the schools closed, when the nursery schools closed, and schools for small children closed. Now we realize that work-life balance, it's an extremely precarious thing. Even if we think we have it, we can sort of throw it out of the window the next day, and that hit women harder than men. And if unreflected by the governments and the regulation, it can bring a lot of unemployment and other problems, and cause a more precarious position of women on the labor market. Two more things that I would like to mention, and I'm reaching the end of my presentation, is these 2 points that I have at the bottom line: digital exclusion and digital gap. Just as I mentioned, the internet connection not being available everywhere, simply the availability of infrastructure and even the knowledge and possibilities is not distributed equally, and there are areas, and there are societies and communities who simply are not as advanced, or as stuff is not as available for them as for the others. And again, if unreflected, it could deepen some sort of existing inequalities or create some new ones. Okay, thank you for your attention, and that would be the end of
Thank you so
my
much.
presentation.
In one of your articles in Czech that I had to translate with Google Translate about the conditions of female workers in Czech Republic during Corona. First, in the beginning of the text, you said, Google says, the measures that the state introduced affected genders differently, but
Mhm.
then you said that those measures didn't affect women. So they basically, and the beginning is like affected differently, but then the end of the article, you say it doesn't affect women, like those regulations. So,
Mhm.
how do you understand your
It may be ever, it may
Maybe
be ever,
Google Translate.
yeah, it may be ever so slightly lost in translation because, to be honest, my writing is not academical. It's like popular writing, and sometimes I tend to be very floral with my expressions, and they don't get translated very easily. However, if I just describe it briefly, the measures that were adopted in spring heavily affected women on a numerous in numerous ways. One of them was obviously the closing of the schools and the nursery schools, as women are still the primary caretakers, especially with small children. The smaller child, the more on average, women take care of them, the more time they spend with them.
But
So
also elderly people and
and
nurses.
yes, yes, yes. So with when all this care transferred home and demanded more time, it was usually women that would do that. As I mentioned, there's a possibility of taking carers leave for 60% of your salary. Because of the huge gender pay gap that remains in Czech Republic, we are the third worst country in the European Union. It's almost always the woman in that family that earns less. Thus, if you count which salary is smaller to start with, you realize if one of the family has to go on the carer's leave, it would be the one with the small salary, and that's usually the woman, which again makes her less desirable on the work market, because now it happens as the schools were closed and reopened many times through the year. The employers now expect that women will basically just stay home, whatever happens.
So
And
distribution of tasks also within
yes,
family happens on basic on like biological kind of.
yes, it's very stereotypically distributed in Czech Republic. There are numbers on that, but and they're awful, but we wouldn't be here forever. But one more thing I would like to say about the measures that affected women were the measures that it had not only on the not on the job market itself. Because part of the measures that were adopted was a closure of some services, of some shops that were not unnecessary, uh, of cultural institutions like theaters and museums. Some of the things were not necessarily closed, but somehow just all of a sudden didn't have business, like tourism and hotels and places like that. And most of these professions that were affected immediately by lack of work are heavily feminized, which means the lack of work in the first half of the year again hit women very hard. And on the other side of the spectrum, the so called first line positions, the positions that were affected by the pandemic in having a lot of work now, typically healthcare, are again heavily feminized. So the differences in who had how much work now were mostly felt by women, plus the increased roles of the home were again mostly felt by women. So women were sort of pushed down from many points, from many like sort of sides, and especially in the beginning, it was absolutely unreflected by the government, and only ever so slowly they realized that whatever things they're doing, they're not gender neutral, and that should be considered and taken into account.
Thank you for your presentations and your answers. We agreed on making a small break at 6:30. I would say we could meet again here or just continue our meeting. And please, if you have some questions for the speakers, you could type them in our chat during the break. I mean, anyway, I have many questions. So if you have some comment, if you would like someone to clarify something a little bit, some references, or if you would like some links to articles or artworks or exhibitions, please just let us know and see you very soon.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
we are back from our small break and we already have some questions. There is a question for Silvio to start with from Christian Lukic. And the question is, Silvio, what do you think about the idea that the artists were avant garde, kind of a role model for today's concept of entrepreneurship? Something that, for example, Boltanski Chapello considers, sorry. Uh-huh. Martina just sent me a message over Facebook. Sorry, I got distracted.
Well, thanks so much for the question, Christian. I agree. I agree. Even in the book, I quote this idea that somehow, let's say, all the emancipatory power of the so-called artistic critique was somehow re-embedded and answered by, let's say, a capitalist drive. So I fully agree. Maybe something to say about like what I see like in the current condition, also being an artist and being in an artist relationship, let's say, with other parties of the art world. I think what's interesting to say is that like I mean, yeah, how can I put it in a general way? Well, let's put it like this. Whenever there is an exhibition, it's always an emergency mode. It never goes smooth. It always something always goes. Maybe Martina can confirm or deny, but anyway, it's always a state of exception. And within this state of exception, even the most very often, at least in my experience, or at least in the second-hand experience I heard, is that also, you know, the most artists with a political stance, everything is like suspended, even the morals, especially on this basic layer of working relationship, especially if you work with assistants, if you work with interns and stuff. Nothing is more important than the piece, than the show. So so this is to say that the art world, even like the middle brow art world that we inhabit, I mean, we are not Marina Abramovic or, I don't know, Richard Serra, is a space of avant-garde also from this point of view, from the point of view that it normalizes the state of exception, it normalizes the lack of basic moral, ethical concerns when there is like the urgency of the event, which is like a bit like this the emergency situation that we have with the pandemic. Everybody has to raise their hand and say, "Ah, yeah, but we have to respond quickly." So we are used to that model, and I'm very skeptical and negative a bit about the art world system from this point of view. So it's gestural more than it's often practices not what it preaches. Yeah, that's what I feel.
What is interesting is that like um, somehow like what I kind of saw in all my kind of conversations with people, especially artists, there is never a recognition of like artist work as like, you know, workers' work or like manual work. There is always identification with this kind of highly intellectual kind of distance from the everyday life thing. Um, so what do you think? I mean, we are here as like three artists and a lawyer to discuss this very relevant social topic or like economic topic, not only of our positions but also of like many people. Do you think that artists are also, you know, workers in a classical sense, but not in, yeah, in a worker sense? So are artists workers, and should artists understand themselves as workers so that they could, you know, put some things forward?
Are you asking me or it's a general question?
I am, if you feel that you would like to answer it, please.
well, maybe someone else now, and then I can, yeah, just not to colonize the space. Maybe Martina has something to say.
Um, I would also continue the question of art, avant-garde and artists. It reminded me also of one of my previous work, which was called actually the work-life balance, and it was an installation which was using the very simple image of the balancing the work and life and utilizing certain aspects of works by art by, for example, Kurt Schwitters uh, and his Meeresbau, which was basically a never-ending installation slash sculpture in his own living room, which was still being redone. And to remind of Kurt Schwitters has lived in the times of the Second World War. He had to escape from the Nazis 2 times. And in each of the spaces he was living, he started doing the Meeresbau, and either he had to leave or it was destroyed. So we have to think about the question of artist and his studio, and also to think what did it mean? When did artist change from the someone living working for the higher purpose, such as the church or the or the emperor, to the artist as an entrepreneur, which started around the 17th century? And what did the 19th century do to this, when the idea of genius slash knowledge work changed the concept of an artist? And when we come back to 2020, um, I believe we can see all of these definitions cruising around in the space, both the not both the 19th century genius concept, the entrepreneur of the 17th century, the artist serving for the higher purpose, but also the avant-garde itself, going for Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, the artist is an engineer of life and space who has everything under control, which after all led to this very notion we are now criticizing, that there are things about human performance which are uncountable, unmeasurable, and uncommodifiable. So I believe we are now at some kind of crisis point, which the coronavirus pandemic brought to the point, to the high peak conflict, that we just can't commodify these things. And so we are also at the crisis of work, probably. What is work, what can't be work? But at the same time, we're speaking of quite a large number of people which are not specifically earning as much as Richard Serra or Marina Abramovic. We have to make some kind of meaning for them, you know? And it's also the question also if the art world, as Silvio, you were mentioning it, should exist in this market model, if it should kind of cancel its marketing models in terms of galleries and private sector and just go for institutions, you know? And um, I would say we in all of this commotion of the definition what is art and what it should do and for whom, we should maybe concentrate more on people, on the humanist side, and to see then how can we make it work for the people who do it. Yeah.
For me it's interesting the way that this the question of Christian was answered, because the thought that came to my mind is like, do you understand avant-garde as a role model, or like like avant-garde as a role model? The working mode of the artist has never been regulated. It has never been a classical job. It was never like employed status kind of person. And like should we, do we want our work to be regulated in a way that like we can, we provide a service and it gets paid, or we do a product and artwork and it gets paid, or we don't want this at all, so we are above the system or beyond or whatever, and we don't want to treat it in any way. And in this case, I like when Martina started, like, this is one thing. Second thing is that I found in this context two works very interesting from Silvio, Projected Capital and Key Candid, actually, especially Projected Capital. Maybe Silvio, you could tell us more, because I somehow have the feeling that you wanted to interfere in these ways or common ways that the art market works.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Projected Capital was a project made with Sebastian Schmig, which is a German artist. We collaborate often. And basically, the idea was that we had the chance to have a solo show in a nice space in Switzerland. And we came up with this idea, which we already sort of played with before, of um, doing two things, of like behaving a bit like real estate agents, so giving like the space of the gallery, which is the space of prestige and show sort of to use it in a bit like in an Airbnb kind of way. So people could there was a huge wall, and people could rent little part of this wall and have their own project artwork or piece projected. And this had a bit of the Ponzi scheme mode, you know, because I mean, it was like a way to really sort of comment a bit of the gig economy and the sharing economy. Say, I have an asset, which is the chance to make a show, so I sell it back to other people, which is somehow people what they do with their apartments in Barcelona, again in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam. So it was like to bring this kind of mentality within the gallery, which plays with this notion of prestige, of like who can enter, who is part of the show, who is not. Yeah, this was more or less the idea. So it was a bit, yeah, it might look a bit of a cynical take, but there was also a beautiful aspect of the piece in the sense that, of course, with the piece you would get a sort of collage of people like being crammed together, like artworks being crammed together. So you would see like a GIF uploaded by someone, a painting uploaded by someone else, and have like this sort of patchwork of artworks. Yeah.
But you sold the space that you got as exhibition space for €1, like, and for how long would people exhibit there if they paid €1?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. I think it was one day. So you know, the
One day,
bigger,
€1.
yeah, the bigger
Art
you,
Airbnb.
yeah, the bigger space you would rent, and the more time you would rent. There was a calculation that would output like an amount of money. I don't
Mm.
remember exactly now the equation, but yeah,
And what did you do with the money?
I was very little. You know, it's not, not much, but a few beers. Yeah.
Mm. I wonder how Sharka sees like the beginning of this discussion. Um, because like actually like her presentation was based on like this kind of regulated work, like this classical job, like employed people like by the state, like employment regulated by law. And we are mostly talking about things that go beyond or around these
Um,
things. And like we are as artists, I guess we always go around these things. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm really curious how Sharka sees her role as a lawyer into this discussion. Like, how do you like? Is there something that you would like to bring in? Because I have very concrete questions to ask you, but it's really interesting perspective. Like in this context, I would say.
Mhm. Well, one of my research projects that I did about 2 years ago was focused on women in precarious work, but not as employees, but as self-employed freelancers, entrepreneurs, and stuff. And I researched different sort of areas. I researched, for example, family farming, or local jobs on local shops and things like that, like single person enterprises. And one of the areas I focused on was arts and intellectual work. um, what struck out was the positions of architects, specifically female architects. as being one of the most precarious of them all. It's because if you want to be an architect, you have to have a specific education and pass some exams. Yet it's a very creative work. It's not just like a technical. I'm not speaking about just like technical engineering, but really the architectural work. So you have to have some talent, you have to have specific education. The job market is small, the opportunities are few. The big studios, if they hire young people, yeah, they give them the absolute minimum wages. Sometimes they don't give them wages at all. Sometimes they're like, freelancers working on a false working agreement. If you want to start on your own, you have to really compete for clients. There is no such thing as minimum wage that would be regulated. Sometimes you probably don't know whoever else is charging what. Or you could go into a competition and provide a study for a small fee, and then you realize that one of the competitors provides the study for free, which gives him or her into advantage. Then, if you want to start a family, you are there's a very poor coverage of self-employed women and young mothers, with like maternity allowances and stuff. So that's obviously again another set of problems. So these creative jobs, uh, when they're self-employed, they really bring for so much. You have to bring so much into the work, so much of the preparation, so much hard work, so much of your talent and invention and creativity, and yet you can't really rely on much that it will come back. You have to hope for the clients, and you have to hope for good payment on time, and that everybody will follow their contracts. And I have to say that that's very sad, and that was one of the things that sort of sort of pushed me into started working with like young upcoming architects in their self-organizing, the creating some sort of groups. They're trying to negotiate with their official bodies, for example, like minimum remuneration levels and things like that. And it's been a slow process, but I found that it really is sad. It's like you have these positions, you have these areas where that not everybody can do, and everything is so difficult, and you have so little guarantees. So that would be my perspective.
I can make a stupid joke, usually because artists come from rich families and they don't even have to do anything. This is a stupid joke.
I, I
But
Cool.
anyway, so Sharka, you think that there is some need s- uh, for the like state regulation of like employment laws, or like how do you understand it? I mean, somehow you claimed in your article that I read that like these laws have to first of all affect everyone in the same way. I mean, or in the same manner, and that they should be adjusted to the current situation because it might actually last very long, right?
Yeah, well, that is true. In my article, that was based on the studies and the research I did this year, the huge problem was the care of the small children. Yeah, because not everybody was entitled for the carers leave. Some people had to quit their jobs to stay at home with children, and it was so heavily affected by women. And if these things return and return and return, that as I mentioned before, women will be even more less desirable in the job market than they are now. And while law is seemingly neutral, it has to be realized that in the real life, you know, it affects different groups differently. It's not just according to gender, it's also according to age, according to many other characteristics. And that should be taken into account. Um, the other thing that was kind of that kind of pop up by the regulation was that, or by the experience, was the fact that really flexible working arrangements do not apply to everyone. Not everybody can work from home, and in times of crisis or epidemiological problems, there should be other measures than just sending people home. You
Or
have to,
bringing them sick to
yeah,
continue working, yes.
yeah.
Which
So
is
so
even
so
worse.
yeah, so that was one of the things that we should. That may not necessarily be legal regulation. It could be just like governmental decrees. But basically, the point is, whenever the government wants to adopt new measures on everything, they should be much more focused on gender impact assessment and other impact assessments that they have been up to now.
But are there some working groups that could advise on such measures and like
Yeah. They are. The expertise is there, but the current government and especially the prime minister are not always listening, shall I say politely.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. I think Martina wanted to say something. Ha, your microphone is off.
Yeah, I I I I wanted to just to say that the what was actually, or ask maybe what was actually also now discussed, is that it's the question of regulation of a higher body. Speaking of a solidarity, speaking of state, and should it be regulated by something they call the market itself, which means then it's also a question if people should be behaving more aggressively and more publicly speaking and shaming, for example. Okay, shaming is maybe too much of a harsh word, but publicly speaking about companies and entities which are not behaving ethically towards their own contractors or subcontractors, and by that to regulate that. Uh, but also at the same time, when I would go back to the art, yeah, and speaking of art and work and regulation, I think is also the question, how much safety do we want and do we need? And the safest artist has most of the time been that artist who was working for the totalitarian regime, having always something to do, having always something to be paid for. But of course, that's an extreme question, and now I'm speaking about a very specific situation of art.
Yes, yes, but for example, you would like to be always paid for the work you do for an institution,
Of
and
course.
most of these things are not actually regulated. And now we are witnessing, if you go to this other level, is that like the governments think even the like liberal ones, like there is like no difference. There was like state intervention in most of societies now, and like they don't care so much about people and the health of their people. They care about economy, and like and not only economy, as Sharka says, like all this kind of feminized um, labor positions, but like economy, like high kind of corporation stuff.
Mm. Mm.
So there was this influence, or there was a like regulate state regulation happened also in the US.
Mm.
So it's a very interesting way of like we no we don't do this, but actually we will support people by I don't know every citizen in Serbia, or like $1,000 to every citizen in the US, or something like this. That's a kind of a social thinking, right?
Yeah, but for example, speaking out of now from Bratislava, where we are sitting now, Slovakia is one of the countries which has given, in statistically seen, the least. It's the second country with the lowest support from the government to all kinds of subjects. That's the first thing to maybe to say. It's one of the country in the European Union which is also one of the lowest supporters, and there has been no flat rate help for arts and culture from March till now. And so by saying that is what I want to elaborate on is that on the other hand, seeing in the arts community, which is left and liberal, I see very little understanding for the small businesses and local entrepreneurs being in a very precarious conditions and vice versa, because it's these subjects in local business and market which are sharing and which are having the biggest problems, not the large players. Large players actually profit more from this situation because they have infrastructure actually built on precarity which can support these situations, such as Amazon, such as IKEA, and not the local producer of some furniture which had to close or reduce drastically the number of the employees. And
Yeah, it's interesting because, for example, there were some funds in Austria for artists, like for self-employed artists by the state. But the problem was that, like, if you haven't managed to graduate because of Corona, like in my like case, in June, I couldn't apply to these things because I was still officially a student, and as a student, you cannot apply for this kind of
mm,
federal um, help from the state only when you graduate. And if
mm,
you cannot graduate because of Corona, this is precisely the reason why they should support you. And they didn't, because you don't fall under the criteria that they kind of figured out. So, I mean, there are many gaps, and I mean, the gaps are like, on all levels. So, like, and we can give different examples how, the system doesn't work and everything like this. But yeah, I mean, there is one question that I would like to ask Silvio, because we have to include him in our conversation. Um, Staying focused and all this kind of is staying focused a kind of a relevant measurement of productivity. So when all these kind of apps for tracking you down your, I don't know, like like your eye movement or something, is there a real measurement of kind of productivity? And like then there is also this other question of you have to gain access to your camera so that this could be performed, so that you can be checked and surveilled. So how do you see this, Silvio, for example, in relation
Yeah.
to your work and your experience?
Thanks so much for the question. I mean, there are a lot of things I would like to, yeah, that triggered my responses for the previous discussion. But yeah, let's stick,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe to the question. Okay. I mean, what I tried to convey in the presentation was that the notion of productivity, to a certain extent, is not just functional. Is like a way to tell ourselves that we are in control, right? What we see now with let's say employer having to deal with people working from home are like is this needs for this illusion of control deployed in the tools we use. And it doesn't really matter if you are an employee or like a freelance worker. You still, when you relate to an institution with an organization, most often than not, you have to abide to the infrastructural decision of the organization that you're working. Case in point, my own working life. What I do mostly is like to teach. And I teach in various design schools, art design schools, as a freelancer. But of course, for logistical reasons, like the platform of choice is the one chosen by the organization. And even if I'm an autonomous worker, freelance worker, with an entrepreneur, like literally, legally an entrepreneur, I have no right to my own tools. I have no right to my autonomy. So, for example, if I have something to say bad, like against, let's say, Microsoft Team, which recently has implemented surveillance mechanism within their big suite, I can't do anything. I mean, it's like, yeah, there is no. I mean, I should go to a tribunal to somehow to make my voice heard. But of course, this doesn't work because it's not just like a legal issue. It's like a sort of casual lock-in sort of situation. My colleagues start to use it. You don't want to be the annoying person that raised their hand and say, hey, look, no, I want to use Jitsi. You know, you don't want to be the only one, you know. That's like the system of surveillance and productivity controlled from the organization then become the norm, even though you're a freelancer. That's the crazy absurdity that is getting me crazy these days. I work with 3 platforms to deal with different organization, and I have to learn all these platforms. It's basically what Sharka was saying. To what extent you have digital disparity and more work that you put in the learning. Like, who pays me this work of learning 3 different platforms? Sorry, I'm going into rant mode.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
stopped
And
here.
who like did you get the university computer, or like, because people who work for companies, they usually get this like kind of company computer so that they can work it from home, but like they don't get paid electricity, they don't get paid like phone bills or like anything like this. It's just like, oh, there's this computer. So at least we can control the privacy, not your, the amount of um, resources you invest when you should be actually paid for this. So it's a very interesting thing. Yes. So the organizers are notifying me that we should go into the final segment of our discussion today. Do you have some more questions? Is there something that you would like to add? Maybe give some example, or I have too many notes here. I have to choose now something which is not so long. I somehow like we didn't talk so much about Martina's works actually. Um, there is a work that I would like to bring in. Um, Laborware. Maybe Martina, you could say something about your work that you exhibited recently in Vienna, where you investigated all these models that could kind of ensure like higher percentage of productivity and decision making, and how the companies actually um, use these tools for figuring out your life. You had a very funny publication there, like have a best time. Like, how was it? Like the till the rest of your life. I took a photo of it. It's you are muted.
Sorry, there is actually this in actually a failed invention of post-its, which was supposed to be the sticky notes which hold forever and ever, but due to the fact that they didn't work with the glue, they can be removed and reattached again, which brought them actually a huge success from 80s onwards. And it actually, the HR departments, the managerial human power realized their ability to maybe organize thoughts. So the idea of the artwork is built around this whole branch of working with colored stickers in order to organize your thoughts, your processes. Um, Independently on the development in the US, where the post-it started, there is the development of lean and agile management, and these tools became so popular then that you can find books, self-help books of how to organize your life with post-its. There's really an industry of organizing your life with post-its, and the artwork basically consists of a pile of books which deal with the post-it agenda, how to organize your life, how to organize your thoughts, how to make people more happy when you organize their work, and so on. And there's one book called The Rapid Problem Solving with Post-it Notes, which basically creates is dealing with 5 basic figures of organizing the thoughts. And based upon these figures, I created large post-it trees or forms which are going precisely against the idea of post-it notes to keep the things simple. They are overdoing it. And when we speak of the productivity, it's exactly the idea to turn the productivity tools against the productivity, because we are learning all the time new tools, new softwares to be better, faster, stronger, and that we are not getting to the content at all in a way. And can you hear me? Because the application says there's
Yeah.
some problem.
We can
Okay.
hear.
And so this was the work which was dealing with it. And in the same room, there was a work which was showing the depictions of workers or work in public spaces in Bratislava and Vienna from the 50s till 80s. And when we speak about work, we also speak about the way work is presented. What is the virtue of work? What are we aiming at? Which place in society does a worker have? And I believe these two things are interconnected, because at the same time we speak about what should be the good worker, but as well, who is also the good employee? Who's the good freelancer? Um, uh, in our societies from which we are now coming, we don't have so much the virtue of identity, but the virtue of activity, which is work, you know? So this could be my statement from my side.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I wish we had more time to discuss because like there are too many topics that need to be discussed right here. I mean, I'm happy that we at least started, and yes, as it was already written, the conversation will be recorded or is being recorded and will be transcribed and translated into Slovak. I guess we will also see it before it gets translated or something. So, yes,
Um,
thank you very much for this nice discussion. Um, like, note for the organizers, I think there is a need to continue this kind of discussions and also the topic of home office in relation to different issues around labor. So, in this sense, I'm inviting you to organize more events with more guests. Um,
we're happy to do it.
yes, I think it would be really interesting to have like more discussions like this, and I'm very glad to um, meet you, and yes, looking forward to our next collaborations.
Thank you.
I would like to also thank to you all in the name of Botav for your time, for your inputs, for your thoughts, and I think it's also always an experiment to combine diverse views on the topic, and it's also a, a good challenge for a moderator to find the gaps in between which are interesting to talk about, or intersections which are maybe um, less visible on the first sight. And therefore, I would love to also thank you, Jelena, for accepting the invitation and being with us tonight.
No, thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, I mean, I really tried to bring some topics together, but we raised so many topics that I somehow see that could be talked about in detail. Like somehow maybe we can use this transcript to actually extract some segments and so that they would be used for some further discussions, like more concentrated. Now it was really very general, and it like actually the perspectives were not that different in my opinion. That's why it was not so hard to put them together in a sense, so that yeah.
I would thank also to Sharka and Silvio also on this place. And yeah, if there is energy for continuing, it will be great to do it. And let's hope there will be more possibility for a physical
Contact.
encounter, yeah, in a way.
Thank you for your invitation. It was very inspirational, and I hope to see you again at some point.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was very extremely interesting. Thanks.
And also bye to our visitors, whoever they came and left in the meantime. I checked there was something like 15, 16 people all together coming and going.
Yes, yes. I mean, it will be easier when you have a steady document that people can read, when they have time.
Sure.
Because many people, like maybe people are still working today.
At the home office,
They cannot
probably.
join us.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much. And yes, so I guess I have to stop the. No, I don't want to do it. Bye, Steve.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Ciao.
Bye, ciao.